I never thought a quiet afternoon with my kids in our own front yard would turn into a nightmare, but that's exactly what happened. One moment, we were just laughing, playing with sidewalk chalk, enjoying the sunshine. And the next, this woman, let's just call her Karen from the HOA, was marching over like she owned the entire neighborhood. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She pointed at my kids, then at me, and started yelling about violations and unsupervised minors. Now, mind you, I was right there. She claimed we were breaking HOA rules by drawing on the sidewalk and accused me of neglect. Yeah, because chalk art is apparently a danger to society now. I stayed calm, tried to reason with her, but it was clear she wasn't there to talk. She was there to make a scene. Then came the part I couldn't believe. She threatened to call Child Protective Services over sidewalk chalk. She even said something like, "People like you shouldn't be raising kids in this neighborhood." That's when it stopped being annoying and started getting personal. What she didn't know: I'm a licensed family lawyer, and I don't take threats to my kids lightly. At first, I thought she was bluffing, but then she actually called. Yes, she called CPS and tried to make a report against me. My heart dropped, not because I did anything wrong, but because I knew how messy these things can get, even when you're innocent. I've seen it happen to clients, and now it was happening to me. But here's the twist: she messed with the wrong mom. What followed next? Let's just say it didn't end well for Karen. She had no idea who she was dealing with. And when I finally pulled out my legal card, her face, well, I'll never forget it. Stick around, because what happened next is the kind of karma you only see in movies, and, trust me, you won't want to miss it. So here's where things really started to snowball. About 30 minutes after Karen stormed off, still muttering about rules and safety, I noticed a car I didn't recognize slowly driving past my house. It circled twice, then parked a few houses down. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, serious face, and that's when I realized she was from CPS. Karen had actually gone through with it. Now, even though I knew I had nothing to hide, the idea of a stranger coming to judge my parenting based on some bitter neighbor's complaint, it rattled me. I mean, I'm used to dealing with this stuff in court, not in my own front yard. My kids had no idea what was going on. They just kept playing, totally unaware. And honestly, that made me even more protective. The CPS worker came over and introduced herself. She was polite, professional, but firm. Said she got a report of unsupervised children playing near the street and a parent showing neglectful behavior. I just blinked at her. I couldn't believe how far this had gone. I calmly explained what actually happened, that I was present the entire time, that my kids were never in danger, and that we were literally coloring on our own sidewalk. I could tell she wasn't fully buying Karen's story, but she still had to follow protocol. She started asking more questions about my job, my routines, the kids' schooling, and I answered everything honestly. When I told her I was a family lawyer, she raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly, like the pieces were clicking together. I even offered to show her my credentials and walk her through anything she needed. But the fact that this woman was even at my house, that my kids were now asking, "Mommy, who's that lady?" it made my blood boil. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd launched a full-on attack, using a system meant to protect children as her personal weapon. And trust me, I wasn't about to let that go. What Karen didn't know is that I had receipts. And once I started digging, let's just say the truth started unraveling faster than she ever expected. That night, after I put the kids to bed, I sat down with a cup of tea, hands still shaking, and pulled out my laptop. I started looking into Karen. Not in a creepy way, just ... professionally. Because something about this felt bigger than a petty neighbor argument. And I wasn't wrong. A quick public records search showed that this wasn't her first time weaponizing the HOA or making complaints against neighbors. She had a reputation. There were old forum posts from past residents talking about her bullying tactics, bogus violations, and how she'd driven people to sell their homes just to get away. I started piecing it together. This wasn't about sidewalk chalk. Karen liked control. She liked power. And she hated when people stood up to her, especially people she couldn't intimidate. I also found out she was recently made the unofficial head of our HOA's compliance committee. Basically, she got a clipboard and now thought she was the law. And the worst part? No one else seemed willing to challenge her. I talked to a neighbor the next day while walking my dog. And when I mentioned Karen, she glanced around before lowering her voice. "Be careful," she said. "She's done this to other families. Files reports. Makes life hard. It's why most people just stay quiet." That hit me hard. Because staying quiet? That's how people like Karen keep winning. Meanwhile, the CPS visit was still hanging over me. The caseworker hadn't closed the file yet, which meant this fake complaint was still on record. And that's dangerous even if it gets dismissed. Those kinds of reports can follow you. Affect your reputation. Your job. I had worked for years, building my career in family law, and now it felt like it was all being put under a spotlight because a neighbor didn't like my kids being kids. I started documenting everything: dates, times, interactions. I installed a doorbell cam, started saving screenshots of neighborhood group chats. If Karen wanted a battle, I was ready. But I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to expose how far she'd really gone. And once I started uncovering what she'd done to others, things took a turn I never saw coming. A few days later, everything reached a boiling point. I had just returned from work when I saw another notice taped to my front door. This time, it was an official-looking letter from the HOA citing me for failure to supervise minors, public disturbance, and, get this, graffiti. They were actually calling my kids' chalk drawings graffiti. I laughed for a second, but it wasn't funny. It was calculated. Karen was escalating, trying to build a paper trail to justify her complaint. That night, I attended the HOA meeting. In person, I didn't say much at first, just sat in the back and listened. Karen was there, of course, holding court like she was the queen of the neighborhood. She even brought up my violations in front of everyone, pretending to be calm and composed, but throwing in passive-aggressive jabs, like, "We just want to make sure our community stays safe for children." That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor. This woman was on a mission. But what she didn't expect. I had come prepared. I waited until the open discussion period and stood up. Calm, clear. I introduced myself, mentioned that I was a family lawyer, and then started laying out fax dates, screenshots, video footage from my doorbell cam showing that I was always present when my kids were outside, and even quotes from neighbors who had experienced similar harassment from Karen. You could feel the air shift in the room. People who had once stayed silent were now nodding. I could tell others were tired of her too. Then I dropped one more bomb: the complaint to CPS. I didn't go into every detail, but I made it clear that a false report had been filed against me and that I was pursuing it through the proper legal channels. Karen's face, pale, blank. She didn't say a word, but just when I thought it couldn't get more intense, something happened that even I didn't see coming. One of the board members pulled me aside after the meeting and said, "You're not the only one. She's done this too. There's more, a lot more." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. After that board member pulled me aside, we talked in the parking lot for nearly an hour. What he told me changed everything. Apparently, Karen had filed multiple complaints against other families, some of them so damaging they led to real investigations and even a couple of families moving out. One family, he said, had to hire a lawyer after Karen accused them of running an illegal daycare just because their cousins visited often. Another had their pet taken temporarily by animal control after a complaint she made. And here's the kicker. This board member had been collecting evidence quietly for months. He said he'd seen the pattern, but hadn't had enough support to confront her until now. You coming forward gave others the push they needed, he told me. That was a moment I won't forget, because up until then, I thought I was just protecting my kids. Now I realized I might be protecting an entire block, but the stakes were getting higher. The next morning, I found something slipped under my windshield, a typed anonymous note. No name, no return address. It said, "Drop it. You're stirring up things you don't understand. HOA rules are there for a reason." I actually laughed out loud at first. Was this a movie? But then I realized this wasn't just Karen. Someone else was involved. Someone who didn't want the truth coming out. I reported the note to the police not as a major threat, but just to have it documented. And then I dug deeper. I requested public records of past HOA meetings, reviewed old violation notices, and started spotting a pattern. The complaints weren't just random, they were strategic, targeted, and always conveniently in line with certain property sales and rule changes that benefited Karen and, possibly, others close to her. At this point, I wasn't just defending my family, was uncovering a pattern.